A desert valley blooms into a garden against all odds. This is the story of forgotten hydraulic systems, medieval marvels of engineering that turned some of the world's driest lands into lush, productive paradises. By the end of this video, you will understand how these ancient blueprints could help solve our modern water crises. We will uncover how entire civilizations flourished using hidden water channels and gravity-fed canals, and why this brilliant technology was ultimately lost for centuries. What forgotten wisdom from our past could change our future the most? Growing food in a desert seems like a contradiction, a battle against nature itself. Yet the earliest farmers in these arid valleys saw not just barren ground, but hidden potential. Their first challenge was the rain, or rather, the lack of it. Water did not fall gently and often. It arrived in violent, unpredictable bursts. Torrential seasonal storms would send flash floods raging through dry riverbeds, only to vanish into the thirsty earth within hours, leaving the land parched once more. The genius of these first settlers was not in creating water, but in learning how to arrest its frantic escape. They became masters of capture, devising simple, brilliant methods to trap this fleeting resource. They would construct low stone walls to divert a portion of the floodwaters into their fields. They dug out small, shallow depressions in the earth to act as reservoirs, allowing the water to seep in and nourish the soil long after the flood had passed. This was not grand engineering, it was survival-level ingenuity, a deep and intimate conversation with the land. Their success hinged on a profound understanding of their environment. They knew which soils retained moisture best, and they identified micro-environments, small sheltered pockets of land where a combination of shade and soil composition could help a seedling survive. They watched where the water naturally pooled after a rain, and they planted there first. This foundational period was not about conquering the desert, but about collaborating with it. By patiently observing the rhythms of water and earth, these communities laid the essential groundwork, proving that life could not only persist but prosper, setting the stage for the hydraulic revolutions that would soon transform entire landscapes. This foundational knowledge was the silent engine behind every successful system. Before a single stone was laid, medieval engineers dedicated themselves to a profound study of the land itself. They were master readers of watersheds, the vast, invisible catchment areas where all rainfall eventually drains into a common river or valley. Their work began not with shovels but with observation. They would walk the high mountain slopes, tracing the paths of ephemeral streams that only flowed after a storm. They noted how the water carved its way through rock and soil, learning to predict its every move. Their goal was to identify the perfect intervention points, the specific spots in the landscape where a small, intelligently placed structure could yield a massive, life-giving result. They understood that in an arid climate, water was never truly absent, it was merely misplaced. The violent downpours that seemed to waste themselves in flash floods were, in their eyes, a vast reservoir waiting to be tamed. By mapping the entire drainage pattern of a region, they could anticipate where this water would flow, and more importantly, where they could gently divert it. This was a holistic approach, a form of large-scale puzzle solving that considered the entire ecosystem. They were not fighting the desert, they were learning its language and cooperating with its inherent logic. This deep, almost intuitive grasp of watershed dynamics became the non-negotiable first step, the essential blueprint from which all their hydraulic wonders would eventually grow. With the land's blueprint firmly in mind, these communities moved to their next great task, harvesting water itself. This was not merely about capturing the occasional flood. It was an art form, a meticulous campaign to wring every last drop of moisture from a reluctant environment. They learned to collect water from sources we might overlook entirely, from rainfall to dew and even the thick fog that clung to mountain slopes. To achieve this, they built extensive networks of cisterns, large underground tanks carved from rock, and shallow ponds that would fill during the rare wet seasons. These reservoirs were their liquid insurance policies, a steady supply held in reserve for the inevitable droughts, but storage was only half the battle. They also reshaped the very ground they farmed, carving the hillsides into beautiful stair-step terraces. These were far more than just flat planting spaces. Each terrace wall acted as a speed bump for rainwater, forcing it to slow down, pool, and most importantly, sink deep into the earth. This process did more than water a single crop. It actively recharged the groundwater aquifers below, refilling the planet's own hidden water banks. In some of the driest regions, their ingenuity reached even further. They erected special walls and piles of stones with surfaces designed to cool the air at night, condensing atmospheric moisture into droplets that would trickle down into collection channels. This was water pulled directly from the air itself. Every one of these methods demanded precise calculation and, crucially, deep community cooperation. Maintaining a network of cisterns or a system of terraces was a shared responsibility, a social contract that bound the community together. The technical brilliance of water harvesting was inextricably linked to the social strength of the people who managed it. How do you move this carefully gathered water across vast, uneven terrain without a single pump? The answer lies in a third principle, the mastery of gravity itself. Gravity was the silent, unstoppable engine that powered everything. After harvesting every possible drop of water, the monumental challenge became moving it across miles of rugged terrain. The solution was a network of gravity-fed canals, the true lifelines of these desert gardens. These were not just simple ditches, they were masterpieces of hydrological design, carefully engineered to use the land's own slopes as a perpetual motion machine for water. The primary goal was a consistent, gentle downward slope, one that kept the water moving at just the right speed. Too steep, and the rushing current would scour the canal beds, carving them deeper and causing catastrophic erosion. Too flat, and the water would stagnate, allowing silt to settle and choke the very channel designed to deliver life. Getting this slope perfect required an almost supernatural skill in surveying. Without modern tools, engineers used simple water levels and keen eyesight to trace a falling line across the landscape for miles. The water's journey was a carefully managed descent from mountain springs to the thirstiest fields in the valley below. But control was just as important as flow. This is where sluice gates and diversion weirs came into play. Think of a sluice gate as a simple wooden or metal plate that could be raised or lowered within a canal. By adjusting this gate, a community could precisely control how much water entered a specific branch of their network. A diversion weir was a more permanent low dam built across a stream, its sole purpose to raise the water level just enough to divert a portion of that flow into a waiting canal. These were the valves and switches of the entire system, allowing for a fair and efficient distribution of water to every farm, according to a strict schedule that everyone understood and respected. The physical construction of these canals was a testament to human determination. Workers would spend years cutting channels directly through solid rock, or building elegant stone aqueducts to carry water across deep ravines where the natural slope was interrupted. This was backbreaking labor, demanding advanced masonry skills to create structures that could withstand the test of centuries. The entire system, from the smallest sluice gate to the longest aqueduct, operated on a single, elegant principle: the constant, reliable pull of gravity. This meant the entire irrigation network required no fuel, no complex machinery, and very little maintenance beyond seasonal cleaning. It was a self-sustaining loop, a gift from the landscape that kept on giving. This ancient reliance on gravity for a sustainable water supply is a principle our most advanced modern irrigation projects still strive to emulate. Yet, these canals were useless without a final, crucial element: a social invention just as vital as the physical one. How did entire communities manage this shared resource without conflict? The answer lies not in stone and water, but in law and cooperation. Beneath the sun-scorched surface, another world of water was quietly flowing. While canals carried water across the land, a more secretive technology was at work far below: a revolutionary system known as the Kanat. These were not mere tunnels, but meticulously engineered underground channels designed to harvest water directly from the earth itself. The process began in the alluvial fans, those sloping aprons of gravel and sand that spill out from mountain bases. Deep within these porous layers, ancient aquifers held vast reserves of groundwater, safe from the evaporating heat of the desert sun. A qanat was a horizontal mine for this liquid treasure. Construction started with the mother well, a deep vertical shaft drilled down until it struck the water table. From there, teams of skilled diggers, known as muqanats, would begin the arduous task of carving a gently sloping tunnel backward, following the natural gradient of the land for miles, all the way to the settlement that needed the water. The true genius of the Kanat lay in this precise, almost imperceptible slope. It had to be steep enough to allow water to flow freely, yet shallow enough to prevent the tunnel from eroding from within. To build it, workers used nothing more than simple plumb lines and their own hard-won experience, judging the gradient by the feel of the water on their feet in the absolute darkness. Along the entire length of the tunnel, a line of vertical access shafts were dug down from the surface every 20 or 30 meters. These shafts served a dual purpose. They provided crucial ventilation for the diggers below, and just as importantly, they were used to remove the countless baskets of spoil excavated from the tunnel. The sight of these lines of circular shafts marching across the desert floor became a signature of this profound technology. Once completed, the Kanat acted as a subterranean river, a permanent, gravity-fed spring that delivered cool, clean water year-round. This reliable source was nothing short of transformational. It allowed cities and vast agricultural estates to flourish in the heart of hyper-arid regions that were otherwise uninhabitable. The cultural and economic impact was immense. The city of Persepolis was famously supplied by qanats, and these hidden waterways became the lifeblood of the Silk Road, enabling caravans to cross deadly deserts by linking one water-rich oasis to the next. The very survival of these trade routes and the cities that grew around them depended on the quiet, constant flow from below. The construction and maintenance of a qanat was a monumental community effort, often taking generations to complete. This was not a technology for a solitary farmer. It was the ultimate expression of long-term collective ambition. The knowledge required to locate the water, to dig the tunnel without collapse, and to maintain its flow for centuries represents a pinnacle of medieval hydrological expertise, a hidden masterpiece of engineering that literally sustained civilizations from the ground up. But even the most brilliant systems are vulnerable. What happens when the society that built them begins to change, or when new priorities emerge? The fate of these hydraulic wonders holds a crucial lesson for us all. Yet even with water flowing through canals and qanats, the battle was only half won. The desert sun is a relentless thief, stealing moisture from the soil almost as quickly as it can be provided. To defend their hard-won water, farmers became masters of conservation, developing a suite of simple yet brilliant techniques to lock moisture into the earth. Their first line of defense was a protective blanket for the soil itself. They would cover the ground around their crops with a thick layer of mulch, often using whatever was locally abundant: straw, dried leaves, or even stones. This layer acted as a powerful insulator. It shielded the damp soil from the direct, baking heat of the sun and broke the force of the wind, which can wick water away from the surface with astonishing speed. A simple stone mulch could reduce water loss from evaporation by half, effectively doubling the impact of every precious drop delivered by their irrigation systems. But their conservation efforts went even deeper, literally changing the composition of the earth. They practiced sophisticated crop rotation and intercropping, growing different plants together in the same field. A farmer might plant deep-rooted legumes beside shallow-rooted grains. The legumes would help fix nitrogen in the soil, improving its health, while their different root structures accessed water from various depths, reducing competition. This diversity created a stronger, more sponge-like soil that could hold onto water far more effectively than a tired, overworked monoculture. In some of the most arid regions, their ingenuity produced what we might now recognize as a precursor to modern drip irrigation. They would bury unglazed clay pots called ollas next to their most valuable plants. These porous jars were filled with water, which would slowly seep through the clay walls directly into the root zone of the plant. This method delivered water with pinpoint efficiency, eliminating any waste from evaporation or runoff. The plant took only what it needed when it needed it from its own personal underground reservoir. Every one of these methods shared a single goal: to maximize the efficiency of every single drop. This was not just about providing water, it was about creating an entire ecosystem where water was respected, protected, and used with absolute precision. It was this holistic combination of grand hydraulic engineering and intimate soil care that allowed their gardens to not just survive, but to thrive for generations. So what happens when this delicate balance is disrupted, when the knowledge that built these systems begins to fade? The glittering city of Palmyra rose from the Syrian desert like a mirage made solid, a testament to water's power to conjure civilization from stone and sand. Its survival depended on a hidden circulatory system, a complex network of canals, reservoirs, and qanats that pulled water from the distant mountains and local springs. Archaeologists tracing the lines of these ancient channels have revealed a metropolis engineered for abundance. This was not a city merely clinging to life, it was a thriving hydraulic hub. Vast underground qanats, much like the ones we explored earlier, tapped into deep aquifers, providing a steady, reliable flow of clean water safe from the evaporating desert sun. On the surface, a web of canals distributed this lifeblood with precision. The water nurtured vast groves of date palms and olive trees, and fields of grain that flourished in the arid heat. This agricultural wealth did more than feed the local population. It formed the very economic foundation of a trading empire. Palmyra sat at a critical crossroads, and its legendary gardens were its greatest advertisement. The city could resupply massive caravans offering fresh fruit, grain for animals, and pure water for thousands of travelers and their camels. This ability to support transient populations on an industrial scale transformed Palmyra from a simple oasis into a cosmopolitan center of commerce and culture. The entire city, from its grand colonnades to its bustling markets, was built upon a foundation of intelligently managed water. Its resilience was a direct product of its hydraulic infrastructure, a system so robust it could withstand the pressures of a growing population and the demands of international trade. The rise of Palmyra stands as one of history's most powerful examples of how sustainable resource management can build an urban civilization in the most challenging of environments. Yet its ultimate fate holds an equally profound warning. When that delicate balance between a city and its water source was broken, the consequences were irreversible. The fall of such a brilliant system was not a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling, a story of decline that echoes into our own time. The glittering canals and hidden qanats were only as resilient as the human hands that maintained them. A system of water laws and social agreements formed the true bedrock of every successful garden valley. This was not a free-for-all. Water allocation was a matter of survival, governed by strict, time-honored customs that everyone understood. In many communities, a local water council, often composed of village elders or elected officials, held the ultimate authority. They managed a detailed schedule, determining which farms received water, on which days, and for exactly how long. This was often measured with simple but effective tools, like a water clock that dripped for a set duration, ensuring no single farmer could take more than their fair share. The entire community also shared the burden of upkeep. Each family was responsible for a specific section of the main canal, tasked with keeping it clear of silt and debris. This was not optional labor, it was a mandatory duty, a tax paid in sweat to ensure the lifeblood of the valley continued to flow for all. When disputes inevitably arose, they were settled not by force but through mediation. The Water Council would hear grievances and deliver a binding judgment based on precedent and communal well-being. This collaborative framework did more than just prevent conflict, it actively wove the community together. The act of collectively maintaining a sluice gate or cleaning a reservoir reinforced a powerful shared identity. People were not just neighbors, they were custodians of a single, interconnected system. Their survival was literally linked by the water they shared. This proves a profound truth. The most brilliant engineering is worthless without the social fabric to sustain it. The stones and tunnels provided the hardware, but it was trust, cooperation, and clear rules that provided the indispensable software. This delicate balance between technology and community, however, is incredibly fragile. When that social contract begins to fray, the entire system, no matter how brilliantly designed, is destined to crumble. Precision was everything. To carve a canal that stretched for miles across broken terrain, maintaining that perfect, gentle slope required more than just a keen eye. It demanded specialized tools born from necessity. Medieval engineers relied on a suite of simple, brilliant instruments to translate their understanding of the landscape into lasting stone and water. The most fundamental of these was the water level. This device was elegantly straightforward, often just a long, hollow wooden tube filled with water. Because water always finds its own level, an engineer could place each end of the tube on a pair of stakes driven into the ground and instantly see if they were at the same height. By moving one stake up or down and repeating the process mile after painstaking mile, they could trace a perfectly level line across vast distances, the essential first step in ensuring their canal would flow without stalling or eroding its own banks. For aligning long, straight sections, they used sighting rods. One worker would hold a tall, marked rod steady at a starting point, while another placed an identical rod far in the distance. A third person, the surveyor, would sight along them, directing the distant worker to move left or right until both rods lined up perfectly. This created a straight visual line across the landscape, a crucial guide for digging. To measure the land itself, they used graduated cords, ropes carefully knotted at regular intervals, stretched taut between 2 points. These cords acted as their measuring tapes, allowing them to calculate distances and, when combined with the water level, determine the crucial gradients. But their toolkit extended beyond the purely mechanical. They were also keen astronomers. By observing the sun's path across the sky throughout the year, they could plan the orientation of walls, terraces, and even entire villages to maximize beneficial shade for water conservation or to capture cooling breezes. This was engineering in harmony with the cosmos. Underpinning all of this physical work was a solid grasp of geometry and mathematics. They knew how to calculate the volume of a reservoir or the cross-sectional area of a canal. By estimating flow rates, they could ensure their designs would deliver enough water to meet the community's needs, not just at the source, but at the very last field in the system. While these tools seem rudimentary today, they were perfectly matched to the task. They were affordable, durable, and most importantly, their use fostered an intimate, hands-on connection between the engineer and the land they were shaping. This was not engineering from a blueprint in an office. It was a continuous physical conversation with the earth itself. The success of their monumental projects stands as a powerful testament to what can be achieved with deep practical wisdom and tools that anyone could learn to use. So what became of this hard-won knowledge that once turned deserts green? The story of its disappearance is a cautionary tale written not in water, but in the shifting sands of history itself. The resilience of these garden valleys was not just built in stone, but woven into the very crops they grew. Medieval farmers understood that a single bad season could spell disaster, so they developed a sophisticated strategy of diversification. Instead of betting everything on one type of grain, they planted a mosaic of crops, blending drought-resistant varieties like millet and sorghum with more water-intensive ones like wheat or barley. If the rains failed, the hardy millet would still yield a harvest, ensuring the community had something to fall back on. This was agricultural risk management at its most fundamental, a deliberate plan to spread vulnerability across a wider portfolio of plants. Their foresight extended deep into the soil itself through the practice of fallowing. A farmer would deliberately leave a field unplanted for an entire growing season, sometimes even 2. To our modern eyes, this might look like wasted land, but it was a critical long-term investment. This rest period allowed the soil to recover its strength, replenishing moisture that had been drawn out by previous crops and rebuilding its natural fertility. Weeds that would have competed for water were instead plowed back into the earth, becoming green manure. This cycle of work and rest created a resilient foundation, preventing the land from becoming exhausted and ensuring it could continue to produce for generations. Where water was a destructive force, they turned it into a resource. In regions plagued by violent flash floods, farmers built low, sturdy check dams across seasonal stream beds. These structures were not meant to create large reservoirs. Instead, their purpose was to slow the angry rush of floodwater, forcing it to drop its precious cargo of suspended silt. Behind each dam, a natural retention basin would form, capturing both water and this incredibly fertile soil. As the water slowly seeped into the ground, it recharged the aquifer, while the deposited silt created a rich, new layer of topsoil perfect for planting. They were not just controlling erosion, they were actively harvesting fertility from the chaos of the weather. Every one of these strategies, from crop choices to fallow fields and clever dams, shared a single unifying principle: adaptation. These communities did not assume their environment would remain static. They planned for uncertainty, building buffers and backups directly into their way of life. Their survival depended on observing subtle climatic shifts and adjusting their practices accordingly, year after year, generation after generation. This deep-seated resilience allowed them to withstand droughts and storms that would have shattered a less flexible system. In their pragmatic wisdom, we see a powerful blueprint for our own era of climatic instability. So what force could possibly dismantle such a deeply rooted and resilient system? The answer lies not in a single cataclysm, but in a slow and quiet unraveling of the world they knew. A quiet revolution in water science was brewing within the libraries and workshops of the Islamic Golden Age. While Europe navigated its early medieval period, a vast network of scholars from Spain to Persia was systematically advancing the art of water management to unprecedented levels. This was an era of intense intellectual curiosity, fueled by a policy of actively seeking out and translating ancient texts. Knowledge from the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians was not merely collected, it was synthesized, critiqued, and dramatically improved upon. In bustling centers of learning like Baghdad and Cordoba, these translated works provided a powerful foundation, but the real genius lay in the new experiments and detailed observations that built upon them. Scholars were not just preserving old wisdom, they were creating a dynamic, living science of water. The most famous of these engineer scholars was Al-Jazari, whose book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices meticulously illustrated a stunning array of water-raising machines. His work described complex pumps, clever uses of gears and cranks, and automated water clocks that were marvels of their time. But Al-Jazari was just one star in a brilliant constellation. Other, less famous scholars wrote exhaustive practical treatises on everything from digging the perfect well to designing the most efficient canal networks, codifying best practices that could be shared across an empire. This explosion of theoretical knowledge had an immediate and visible impact on the ground. The iconic Noria, a massive water wheel powered by the current of a river itself, became a common sight across the landscape. These towering structures could lift water high into aqueducts to feed irrigation systems far above the riverbank, turning previously unreachable land into fertile soil. The basic Kanat system was refined and expanded, with new surveying techniques allowing for longer and more stable underground tunnels. The widespread adoption of these technologies created a dramatic surge in agricultural productivity. Vast estates produced surplus crops like sugarcane, cotton, and rice, which in turn fueled economic growth, trade, and urbanization. The bustling souks and flourishing cities of the Islamic world were, in many ways, built upon this foundation of advanced water science. The Golden Age demonstrates a powerful truth that the free flow of ideas across cultures is just as vital for progress as the flow of water across a field. This period of brilliant innovation, however, could not last forever. A convergence of forces, both human and environmental, would soon begin to test the limits of even the most advanced hydraulic systems. Scattered across the ruins of ancient irrigation networks stand enigmatic structures that archaeologists call water temples. These were not merely places of worship, but the very command centers of the hydraulic world, where spiritual authority and practical necessity converged. Their locations were never arbitrary. A water temple was almost always built at a critical node in the water system, right at the source of a sacred spring or at the main junction where a primary canal split into dozens of smaller channels. This strategic positioning was profoundly symbolic. It physically anchored the community's most important spiritual sites to its most vital physical resource. The priestly class who managed these temples held a dual role. They were both spiritual intermediaries and water masters. Their authority came from the belief that they could commune with the deities who controlled the rain and the rivers. This divine connection gave them the unquestioned power to regulate the water schedule. A farmer would not dare challenge a water allocation that was presented as the will of the gods. The intricate rituals and festivals held at the temples throughout the year were far more than pageantry. A ceremony at the start of the planting season, for instance, was a powerful public reaffirmation of the water distribution rules. It reminded everyone of their duties and their place within the system, ensuring social order and compliance in a way that pure enforcement never could. The architecture itself was hydraulic. A temple might feature a central sanctum where a natural spring emerged from the rock, its water channeled through beautifully carved stone conduits that ran directly into the irrigation network outside. Ornate pools within the temple complex were not just for ritual cleansing, they were sedimentation tanks, allowing silt to settle before the clean water continued its journey to the fields. This seamless blend of form and function meant that a visit to the temple was also a visit to the waterworks. The community, in coming to worship, would also see the system being maintained and managed, reinforcing the idea that their survival was a collective spiritual endeavor. The mystery of these water temples unravels to reveal a profound truth. For these societies, there was no distinction between managing water and serving the divine. Engineering was an act of faith, and faith was the glue that held the engineering together. This deep cultural interweaving created systems of remarkable stability, but it also contained a hidden vulnerability. What happened to these gardens when the faith in the old gods began to fade, or when the priestly engineers were no longer there to read the land? A stark divide in philosophy emerges when we compare the water worlds of medieval Europe and the Middle East. In the rain-blessed monasteries of France and England, water management served a dual purpose. Elaborate networks of channels fed ornate fountains and tranquil fish ponds, creating spaces for reflection and symbolizing the purity of faith. These systems were impressive, but their primary goal was often to enhance a self-sufficient estate, blending utility with profound aesthetic and spiritual meaning. Water was a feature of the landscape, an element to be beautifully arranged. Across the Mediterranean, in the arid heartlands of Persia and the Levant, water was not a decorative element, it was the absolute essence of survival. Here, every innovation was ruthlessly focused on efficiency. The magnificent Kanat tunnels and vast rainwater cisterns were not built for contemplation, but for sheer necessity. There was no room for waste. A single misallocated drop could mean the difference between a harvest and a famine. This fundamental difference in priority shaped the technology itself. European engineers became masters of river power, perfecting the watermill to grind grain and saw wood, harnessing the abundant surface water that flowed year-round. In the desert, engineers looked not to rivers but to the sky and the earth. Their genius lay in capturing fleeting downpours and tapping secret aquifers, creating resilience against an infinitely harsher climate. Yet for all their differences, these two worlds shared a common thread, a deep and intimate conversation with their local environment. Neither system could have been transplanted to the other's land with any hope of success. The European mill would have been useless in a wadi that ran dry for 10 months of the year, just as a qanat would be unnecessary in a water-rich river valley. This comparison reveals a crucial truth. There is no single solution to water management. The most brilliant systems are those perfectly adapted to their specific context, born from a clear-eyed understanding of local constraints and possibilities. The legacy of these contrasting approaches raises a vital question for our own time. As we face global water shortages, can we learn to be as context-specific and adaptive as these medieval engineers were? The shadow of Rome fell long across the medieval landscape, not just in crumbling walls but in the water that still flowed. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, medieval communities inherited the bones of a hydraulic giant, the Roman aqueduct. These monumental structures, with their towering arches marching across valleys, were often too vital to abandon. In places like Spain and France, local rulers and monastic orders took on the role of custodians, carefully maintaining these ancient channels. They became masters of repair, patching cracks in the stone conduits and clearing the sedimentation tanks that the Romans had built centuries earlier. The original system, designed to supply legions and lavish bathhouses, was often too grand for a smaller, more rural population, so they adapted it. A massive aqueduct leading to a deserted city might be partially dismantled, its flow diverted into a simpler, smaller canal that fed a monastery's fish ponds and irrigated the abbey's fields. This was not a decline in skill, but a pragmatic recalibration for a new era. They were taking a centralized imperial technology and decentralizing it for local survival. The most profound legacy, however, was not in the stone itself, but in the knowledge embedded within it. By studying these Roman marvels, medieval engineers reverse-engineered their core principles. They saw how the Romans used the arch to distribute weight and span great distances, a technique that would later inspire the soaring vaults of Gothic cathedrals. They learned the critical importance of a consistent gradient by tracing the aqueduct's gentle, relentless descent from mountain spring to city gate. This borrowed wisdom then traveled far beyond the old imperial borders. In regions the Romans never conquered, you can see their indirect influence in the ambitious aqueducts of medieval kingdoms, structures that applied Roman principles to local materials and needs. The endurance of these waterworks, functioning for 1,000 years after the fall of the empire that built them, speaks to a robustness that is almost unimaginable. It proves that the most valuable part of an empire's collapse can sometimes be the useful infrastructure it leaves behind. This technological thread, stretching from the classical world to the medieval, shows that progress is not always a matter of invention, but often of intelligent preservation and clever adaptation. Yet even these robust Roman relics could not withstand the greatest threat to any water system, a threat that comes not from nature, but from within human society itself. This agricultural abundance did more than just fill local granaries, it reshaped entire economies. The surplus generated by these hydraulic gardens became a powerful form of currency. Valleys that were once written off as barren wastelands began producing highly sought-after commodities. Spices with flavors intense enough to preserve food and mask the taste of aging meat, cotton so fine it could be woven into luxurious textiles, and fruits like dates and apricots that could be dried and transported across continents. These were not just crops, they were luxury goods with immense value. This bounty naturally flowed into the arteries of long-distance trade, most famously the Silk Road. A caravan crossing the brutal Taklamakan Desert did not just carry silk, it survived on the water, fruit, and grain supplied by oasis towns sustained entirely by Kanat systems. These towns were not passive way stations, they were active, thriving economic hubs. The ability to produce a surplus meant a community could specialize. One valley might focus entirely on cultivating saffron, while its neighbor perfected rosewater. This specialization spurred a virtuous cycle. Merchants, attracted by these valuable goods, would establish permanent warehouses and shops. Artisans followed, setting up workshops to craft leather, weave carpets, or work metal, using raw materials paid for with agricultural wealth. Small villages swelled into bustling market towns, and some of those towns grew into formidable urban centers. The wealth was not hoarded. A significant portion was reinvested into the community through a system of patronage. Successful merchants and landowners, often out of a mix of civic duty and religious obligation, funded the construction of new public baths, libraries, and mosques. They endowed schools and supported scholars, creating centers of learning that, in turn, produced the next generation of engineers and administrators capable of maintaining the very water systems that created the wealth in the first place. This was a self-reinforcing loop of prosperity, all flowing from the initial miracle of turning water into wheat and wheat into gold. Yet this concentration of wealth and resources also had a darker side. Control over water inevitably translated into political power. The individual or family who owned the primary canal's headgate or who financed the maintenance of the most critical qanat held immense influence over everyone downstream. Disputes over water rights could escalate from village arguments to full-scale regional conflicts, with armies sometimes being deployed not to conquer land, but to control its water sources. The very resource that built these civilizations could also become a weapon, revealing the profound and sometimes perilous link between hydraulic engineering and the balance of power. This ethical framework was the invisible current that guided every hand. For these communities, water was not a mere resource to be exploited, but a sacred trust, a divine gift bestowed upon all living things. This belief was woven directly into their legal systems and daily practices, creating a powerful moral check against greed and short-sightedness. It was commonly held that denying a traveler a drink from a public well was a sin, and upstream users were legally forbidden from altering a river's flow to the detriment of those living downstream. This was environmental ethics in action, a recognition that the health of the human community was inseparable from the health of the watershed. Their legal codes were surprisingly explicit in their protection of the commons. You could find regulations that strictly forbade the washing of animal skins or the dumping of tannery waste directly into a drinking water canal. Other laws safeguarded the fragile zones around springs and riverbanks, prohibiting the cutting of certain trees whose roots held the soil together and prevented erosion. These were not suggestions, they were enforceable rules with real consequences, designed to preserve the purity and flow of water for everyone, including the poorest members of society who had no land of their own. This long-term thinking extended to the landscape itself. They understood that a healthy watershed required a healthy ecosystem upstream. There are records of villages collectively deciding to reforest a denuded hillside, recognizing that the trees acted as a natural sponge, capturing rainfall and releasing it slowly into the streams throughout the dry season. They protected wetlands not as wasted land, but as vital natural filters that cleaned the water and provided habitat for the creatures they believed were part of the same interconnected web of life. This was not a sentimental view, it was a pragmatic one born of centuries of observation. They knew that poisoning a river upstream would sicken families downstream, that stripping a forest would lead to devastating floods, and that hoarding water would ultimately breed conflict and famine for all. Their entire approach was a masterclass in sustainability, a system where practical necessity and spiritual reverence were two sides of the same coin. How did this profound and balanced relationship with nature, one that built civilizations in the desert, finally come to an end? The answer lies in a slow unraveling, a story of forgotten wisdom that holds a critical mirror to our own time. Even the most brilliant waterworks cannot survive a society in collapse. The silence that fell over these garden valleys was not a single event, but a slow unraveling, a cascade of failures that severed the vital link between human hands and the systems they sustained. Political turmoil was often the first crack in the foundation. When a stable empire fractured into warring states, the centralized authority that organized the cleaning of major canals and the repair of qanats simply vanished. Invasions could be even more catastrophic. a conquering army unfamiliar with the delicate balance of the local watershed might deliberately destroy a Kanat to subdue a rebellious city, not realizing they were poisoning the very land they sought to rule. Shifting trade routes dealt another slow economic death. A bustling oasis town, its wealth built on supplying caravans, would wither into a ghost town when the flow of merchants found a new path, taking with it the financial resources needed to pay the mukanis, the tunnel diggers, for their essential maintenance work. Beneath these human struggles, the climate itself could turn against them. A series of prolonged droughts, lasting not just years but decades, would push even the most resilient system past its breaking point. A Kanat's mother well might sink below a permanently lowered water table, its life-giving flow reduced to a trickle and then to dust. A network of canals designed for a certain volume of water would become a useless labyrinth of cracked mud under a relentless sun. The social fabric woven around water sharing would fray and then tear under the strain of absolute scarcity. Perhaps the most insidious factor was the quiet loss of knowledge itself. The engineering behind a Kanat was not written in a textbook. It was an oral tradition passed from master to apprentice through years of working in the dark, damp tunnels. The precise feel of the correct gradient underfoot, the subtle signs of a tunnel wall ready to collapse, the ancient songs that held the surveying formulas, all of this was stored in human memory. When the artisan guilds disbanded for lack of work, or when a generation chose the promise of city life over the backbreaking work of their ancestors, that priceless library of practical wisdom vanished in a single lifetime. The stones remained, but the understanding of how to make them sing with water was gone forever. This disappearance forces a haunting question upon us. What indispensable knowledge are we, in our own time, quietly losing, and what will the cost be when we finally realize it is gone? The stones themselves seem to hold a secret. Across these ancient landscapes, the geometry of water reveals a deeper mystery in the precise alignments of canals and reservoirs. Some channels were cut to run perfectly east-west, designed to catch the first and last light of the equinox sun. A major reservoir might be positioned so that on the summer solstice, the sunrise would glint directly across its entire length, turning the water into a river of fire. This was far more than practical engineering. It was a form of landscape architecture imbued with cosmic significance. The water system was not just a tool for survival, it was a celestial clock and a sacred calendar made of earth and water. These alignments suggest that the flow of water was tied to the cycles of the heavens, blending the practical need for irrigation with profound ceremonial functions. A community gathering to open the sluice gates at the dawn of the solstice was participating in a ritual that connected their harvest to the motion of the stars. The precision involved is staggering. Achieving such alignments over miles of terrain, using only simple sighting rods and water levels, points to a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and geometry that we are only beginning to appreciate. Beyond the stars, the layout of these systems often follows the land's own hidden logic. Some networks mirror the paths of deep geological faults, those fractures in the Earth's crust where groundwater naturally rises to the surface. Were these engineers simply tapping into unseen aquifers with an uncanny accuracy, or did they perceive these fault lines as spiritual veins, the life force of the Earth itself? Other patterns evoke the concept of ley lines, those hypothetical alignments of ancient sites said to carry terrestrial energy. Whether these pathways were real or symbolic, their presence in hydraulic design hints at a worldview where every element, from a trickle of water to a mountain ridge, was part of a single, animated whole. The debate continues, with some scholars seeing clever geology and others perceiving a lost spiritual geography. perhaps the most compelling answer is that for these builders there was no distinction. A canal that followed a fault line was both a supremely efficient water source and an act of reverence, a way of harmonizing human need with the deep, invisible currents of the world. This symbolic dimension transforms these structures from mere machines into profound cultural statements, leaving us to wonder what other layers of meaning are etched into these forgotten gardens. The line between a miracle and a well-placed well was often beautifully blurred. Across the medieval world, communities preserved legends not of warriors but of water-finders, individuals gifted with the uncanny ability to locate hidden springs. A wandering saint in a parched European village might strike his staff against a rock after a prophetic dream, and a fresh spring would bubble forth. A Sufi mystic in the desert, guided by a vision, would point to a seemingly barren spot, and diggers would indeed find the sweet taste of groundwater. These stories were far more than simple folklore. They were a culture's way of encoding and celebrating a profound, life-saving skill. The mystical figure in the tale often stands in for the real-world water master, the person whose knowledge was so deep it appeared supernatural to everyone else. This intuitive hydrology was a form of genius born from a lifetime of observation. A master waterfinder could read the landscape like a book. They knew that certain types of vegetation, like willow trees or reeds, were nature's signposts, their roots perpetually drinking from shallow aquifers. They observed the behavior of insects and the morning dew patterns on the ground, subtle clues that pointed to moisture hiding just beneath the surface. The gentle dip of the land, the specific color and composition of the soil, even the way sound traveled over different types of earth, all of it was data. Their divining rod was not a forked stick, but a mind honed by experience, capable of piecing together these faint environmental signals into a confident prediction. When this deep practical knowledge resulted in a successful well, the community, understandably, saw it as a divine gift. It was easier to attribute such a vital discovery to a saint's intervention than to the subtle art of hydrological deduction. This spiritual framing served a powerful social purpose. It protected the water source. A spring revealed by a holy man was instantly sanctified. It became a protected place, a commons that no single individual could claim or pollute without facing spiritual and social condemnation. The legend itself became a form of conservation law, woven into the community's identity. These tales of hidden sources remind us that for medieval people, the world was alive with meaning, and a successful technological act was never just engineering, it was a conversation with the divine. This fusion of belief and practicality created systems that were not only functional but also sacred, and therefore worth protecting for generations. So what happens when a society's way of seeing the world, this very fusion, begins to fracture? The stones themselves speak in a language of angles and symbols. Look closely at the carvings on an ancient sluice gate, and you might not see mere decoration but a set of instructions. A series of concentric circles could indicate the ideal water level for the spring planting, while a pattern of zigzag lines might be a warning, a symbolic representation of a torrential flow that could damage the canal banks. These architectural designs are a form of encoded knowledge, a permanent record etched into the very infrastructure. For a society where literacy was not universal, this symbolic language ensured that vital information about flow rates, maintenance schedules, and seasonal adjustments could be read and understood by every generation of water masters. The encoding went far beyond simple pictograms. The dimensions of the canals themselves hold a mathematical secret. Archaeologists and engineers have discovered that many of these waterways were built using precise geometric ratios. The width of a channel in relation to its depth might follow the golden ratio, a proportion known to create a naturally efficient and stable flow, minimizing friction and preventing sediment from settling. This was not an accident. It was the application of advanced mathematical principles to solve a very practical problem, optimizing the delivery of life to the fields. Deciphering this hidden language requires a unique collaboration. Epigraphers, experts in ancient writing, work alongside hydrologists to interpret the symbols. Archaeologists map the structures, while engineers run fluid dynamic simulations to test whether the proposed meanings actually hold water, both literally and figuratively. The great unresolved question is one of intent. Were these carvings and ratios purely a technical manual, a durable way to pass on engineering best practices? Or were they also a form of ritual, a way of blessing the water by binding its physical path to sacred geometry and cosmic harmony? Perhaps for the builders there was no distinction. A perfectly proportioned canal was both a marvel of engineering and an act of reverence, its efficient flow a testament to a universe in balance. Unlocking these stone codes reveals a society that thought in multiple dimensions, where every structure served a practical, mathematical, and possibly a spiritual purpose all at once. This layered intelligence challenges our modern separation of science and symbol, suggesting that their greatest strength was in uniting them. Deep in the mountain villages, the old ones still speak of ceremonies for the canals. Long after the last engineers were gone, communities continued to perform enigmatic rituals at the water's edge. They would place small offerings of flowers or food at the base of a particular sluice gate, or chant specific songs while walking the length of a primary aqueduct. To an outside observer, these acts might look like superstition, an attempt to appease capricious water spirits, but the truth is far more fascinating. These rituals were, in fact, a sophisticated form of social technology. The ceremonial walk along the canal bank was not just a procession, it was a communal inspection. As the village elders moved slowly past each section, their trained eyes were checking for cracks in the stonework or for telltale silt buildup that could indicate a problem. The offering placed at the head gate often coincided with the seasonal opening of the water flow, a symbolic act that physically drew the community's attention to this most critical piece of infrastructure. The songs they sang were not random melodies, they were mnemonic devices, their lyrics encoding vital information about the correct water level for different seasons or the specific tool needed to adjust a certain type of gate. A single verse might remind everyone that after the summer festival, the flow to the eastern terraces must be reduced by half. This transformed routine maintenance from a chore into a sacred duty, ensuring that everyone, from the youngest apprentice to the oldest farmer, understood and remembered their role in the system's survival. The silent guardians were not mythical spirits, but the people themselves, bound together by a living tradition that fused practical knowledge with deep cultural reverence. This fusion of ritual and reason created a powerful, self-perpetuating cycle of care. When the meaning behind the ritual was forgotten, the empty shell of the ceremony often persisted for generations, a haunting echo of a lost wisdom. What other vital instructions for survival have we reduced to mere folklore, without ever understanding their original, life-saving purpose? For centuries, these garden valleys slept beneath the sand, their stories fading into local legend. Then, from the silent void of space, a new kind of vision began to stir. Archaeologists started scanning satellite images, looking for more than just ruins. They were hunting for ghosts in the landscape, the faint scars and discolorations that hinted at something vast hidden just below the surface. A straight, slightly darker line cutting across a barren plain might be the ghost of a buried canal. A perfect circle of stunted vegetation in the middle of nowhere could mark the location of a collapsed reservoir, its lingering moisture still feeding the roots of hardy desert plants. This bird's eye view revealed patterns that were utterly invisible from the ground, a sprawling blueprint of ancient ambition. Once a promising site was identified, the investigation moved closer to the Earth. Teams would arrive with ground-penetrating radar, a device that sends pulses of energy into the soil and reads the echoes that bounce back. Walking back and forth in a grid, they could map the subterranean world without ever lifting a shovel. The screen would light up with the clear, geometric signature of a buried Kanat tunnel, or the solid outline of a stone sluice gate waiting in the dark. This technology acts like a pair of X-ray glasses for the Earth, confirming the satellite's suspicions and guiding the excavators to the exact spot to dig. When the shovels and brushes finally break through, they are not just uncovering stones, they are resurrecting a lost intelligence. An excavation might reveal a sluice gate so perfectly preserved that it could almost be turned back on today. The wooden gate itself has long since rotted away, but the intricate stone slot it slid into remains, a testament to the precision of its makers. Or they might clear the debris from a qanat's access shaft, descending into the cool darkness to find the tunnel walls still smooth, the work of master diggers who ensured their craft would last for millennia. Each trowel of dirt removed is a conversation with the engineers of the past, but the real revelations often come from the dirt itself. By analyzing the layers of sediment trapped in a dried-up reservoir, scientists can read the history of its use like the rings of a tree. A thick layer of fine silt might indicate a long period of stable, gentle water flow, while a band of coarse gravel and debris tells a story of a catastrophic flood that overwhelmed the system. They can even date these layers, creating a precise timeline of when the system was built, when it was most productive, and when it was finally abandoned. Studying the mortar between the stones can reveal the specific recipe of clay and ash they used, a local formula perfected over generations. This modern rediscovery does more than just confirm the old stories, it adds breathtaking detail to them. We are no longer relying on fragmented texts, we are holding the very tools they used and walking the canals they dug. This tangible evidence provides a powerful new blueprint for our own time. As we face our own water crises, the solutions are not always in inventing something new, but in remembering something very, very old. The archaeological work continues, each new discovery a whisper from the past urging us to listen. These ancient blueprints for survival are now finding new life in our modern world. The very principles that sustained medieval garden valleys are being re-examined by engineers and planners confronting today's water crises. One of the most powerful lessons is the elegance of gravity-fed systems, which required no fossil fuels and very little complex machinery. Modern projects are rediscovering this wisdom, designing irrigation networks that rely on the natural slope of the land to move water, drastically cutting energy consumption and operational costs. This is not a step backward, but a step toward true sustainability, aligning perfectly with our goals for a greener future. In regions plagued by desertification, the old techniques of rainwater harvesting are being actively revived. Farmers are once again building contoured ditches and small check dams to capture precious rainfall, allowing it to sink into the earth instead of washing away. They are relearning the art of soil moisture conservation, using organic mulches and planting cover crops to shield the ground from the evaporating sun, just as their medieval predecessors did. The most crucial revival, however, may be social, not technical. The community-based management models of the past demonstrate an undeniable truth that technology alone is not enough. Successful modern water projects increasingly mirror this by prioritizing local governance and stakeholder engagement. When the people who depend on a water source are directly involved in its management and upkeep, they develop a sense of ownership and responsibility that no top-down regulation can ever mandate. This historical knowledge offers a reservoir of resilience we can draw from. By studying how these societies adapted to climatic shifts and resource scarcity, we can adapt their time-tested strategies for our own uncertain future. The goal is not to copy their methods stone for stone, but to embrace their underlying philosophy, one of working with the environment, not against it. Could the same ingenuity that once turned arid valleys into gardens help us transform our own challenged landscapes once again? The legacy of these forgotten canals is not just buried in the desert, it is waiting in a classroom. To solve the water crises of tomorrow, we must first teach the wisdom of the past, integrating the study of historical hydraulic systems directly into our educational curricula. Imagine a course on sustainable design where students don't just read about abstract theories, but analyze the Kanat as a masterpiece of passive cooling and groundwater management. These ancient systems become powerful case studies in adaptive management, showing how societies thrived by observing and cooperating with their environment, not conquering it. The learning moves beyond textbooks through hands-on projects, where students build model canal networks out of simple materials, struggling to maintain that perfect gravity-fed slope just as medieval engineers did. They feel the challenge of allocating water fairly among their classmates' model farms, learning the social dimensions of engineering firsthand. The most effective approach is inherently interdisciplinary, weaving together history, engineering, and ecology into a single, compelling narrative. A student of environmental science might study how the terracing in a medieval valley prevented soil erosion and recharged aquifers, while a future policymaker examines the water laws that prevented conflict for generations. This holistic perspective breaks down the modern silos that often separate technical solutions from their human and ecological context. By engaging with these tangible examples of past success and failure, students are equipped with more than just facts. They gain a deep, intuitive understanding of resilience. They learn that the most elegant solutions are often rooted in simplicity and a profound respect for natural systems. This educational foundation does not simply preserve a legacy, it actively cultivates a new generation of problem solvers who can draw from a deep well of historical ingenuity to meet the unprecedented challenges of our future. The story of these forgotten hydraulic systems is ultimately a testament to human creativity in the face of immense environmental challenges. From the intricate qanats of Persia to the gravity-fed canals of the Andes, these were not just feats of engineering, but profound acts of collaboration with the natural world. The key takeaway is not the stonework itself, but the wisdom embedded within it. These civilizations thrived because they first sought to understand their watersheds. They built resilience through community cooperation, and they remained endlessly adaptive in their strategies. As we confront our own modern water crises, from depleted aquifers to devastating droughts, these historical examples offer more than just inspiration. They provide a practical blueprint. They remind us that the most sustainable solutions are often rooted in simplicity, observation, and a deep respect for the cycles of nature. This journey through medieval hydraulics is an invitation to look backward as we plan for the future, to rediscover how ancient wisdom can help us cultivate a more resilient world. Thank you for joining this exploration. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's hidden marvels, please subscribe.